Hi, everybody. So, end of week 9, I'm talking to you from a very warm south of Brazil, and where I'm going to go off to the university down here um, tomorrow and Wednesday for some kind of collaborative talks. So, thank you to Julia and Jiwoo for navigating us through critical perspectives this week, which is always a challenging week for people because we're having to confront and talk about a lot of things that we normally don't talk about very much explicitly, and they really need to be discussed explicitly. And I think that came through very nicely in the contributions that everybody made this week. I'm just going to actually use the lovely summary that Julie and Jiwoo put together to highlight a couple of points from our discussions this week, and then talk a bit about what we're going to do in the coming week. Um, Yes, I think this key of trying to appreciate differences and make safe spaces is really our goal here. The challenge is that, as I had mentioned at different points in various of the discussions this week, that it's difficult to know how to do that as an online instructor, in part because there hasn't been a lot of scholarship in this area. It's fairly new, and as I mentioned, the research in the area of online learning has always been done in a very separate space from that of critical perspectives, and even using critical lenses to understand ideas. That's not the same thing as having really informed pedagogy that applies those principles. And I still think that that's something that's lacking in our kind of, I don't know, teaching toolbox, if you like, and something we really have to work at. Um, yes, I think this a very key point is that educators should be aware of and challenge their own stereotypes and biases. I mean, we all come with those things. We all have ways of looking at the world, and we get comfortable in those. And I think when you've been part of a particular group, particularly a dominant group, it's just inevitable that unless those views are challenged in some way, you tend to kind of continue with them because that's sort of human nature. But we really do have to spend some time doing that kind of work so that we can um, be better at making these safe spaces. Um, and I think it's true that students do appreciate that disembodied nature of online spaces for some of them, because I think that it does give, certainly from the students who talked to my graduate student Murat in his thesis, um, it does provide spaces that people can construct a little more, um, so that they don't have to be completely self-disclosing. And you can imagine that along a number of different perspectives, not just ones to do with culture, but also, um, you know, sexuality and gender and all sorts of other things. So, um, there's this tension, I think, in the educational context between wanting to be to be present and be present for and be who you are with other people. I mean, that's partly why I make these videos, right? Is so that you have a sense of who I am. Um, and that is an important part of building trust. And yet, for people who've had, um, more racialized and traumatic experiences, and who've been othered in various sorts of ways, that's very threatening. So, we do have to, I think, evolve practices that take these things into account over time. And I think the only way to do it is by talking about it and creating a safer, creating spaces where people are kind of aware and figuring out what are good kinds of discourses and good kinds of rules for discourse that we might establish to work in this environment. So social norms and stereotypes are indeed imported into real world environments because we are who we are. And even if we pretend to be other things, and I think there is a certain level of performance, as people were mentioning this week, in everything that we do, right? We all perform in class, whether we're instructors or students, actually. But it doesn't mean we're completely unreal. It's just, and I think interactively that we do that. We present ourselves in particular ways. So that's not going to disappear when we go online. It's just that I guess we have the option to to divert that or change that in particular sorts of ways. And I think this idea of avatars is very very important, and I'm still wrestling with this. I'm thinking that it might be worth at the beginning of these online courses to spend time having people create their own avatar representations. The trouble is, and and then they could make either a little storyboard, like um, like with Bitstrips or something. But there are still it's really hard to get applications that don't do something. I mean, so the ones that are not kind of presenting these really kind of strangely gendered. I don't mean strangely gendered. I mean they're too stereotypically gendered figures, where you have to start by deciding what gender you want to be. Well, why do you have to start there? Why? I would like to be able to either have somebody design an app where you didn't have to do that, where you could tell, I don't know, maybe provide some kind of visual image, and it could be any image maybe, that that or a set of things that you put together that represents you in a way you want to be represented in this class. And I can't decide whether that will be alienating for some people, or if some people who put photographs in will feel more a sense of connection than people who don't. Anyway, so I'm still toying with how to do that aspect, but it's not just it's not as simple as just making avatars, because the avatars programs themselves have a lot of this stuff embedded in it. So it is hard to figure out. The I think the one of the potentials, which we're still just beginning to tap, and I was talking a bit about this in one of the discussions this week, was that the online tools have the potential for giving us ways to look at some of the things that are not obvious. And so listening and reading online, or that listening and reading are the kind of the same thing online. And what are people doing with that? And people who are doing that work are also contributing and participating. And we haven't got good ways of talking about that or representing that. And that's an area of research that I'm working on with a number of my students, and as part of the overall Pepper project, to try to get better at, and so that we can provide tools that give feedback for teachers, but also tools that allow that activity to have valid representation as part of, and be counted as part of participatory activity. And so we have to find ways of doing that. And we did talk this week about how that can be problematic sometimes, because it's not entirely accurate. So some people have strategies for only going online when they've got their notes and content ready. So they go in and copy paste, and then then you can't count just time online. We have a way of looking at something we call scan rate, where we look at when people open notes. But even that, I mean, is obviously subject to a certain degree of error. But I think everything is. I don't think there's going to be a perfect measure out there. I think we have to work to find measures that have the most validity, that are the best that we can figure out. So and that's another kind of strand of research that we've been engaging in and will do more of. So I think this issue of addressing possible cultural, racial, or gender issues at the beginning of a new year, I think opening up that space for discussion, and I'm still struggling with a good way to do that at the beginning of the year without putting off people for whom this kind of discussion is a bit unfamiliar and who feel nervous. To do it right away can put some people off, because there hasn't been an established sense of trust, which is one of the reasons I put this critical perspectives thing so much later in the course. It's not because I don't think it's important. It's just that I like to have more of a sense of community established before we get to that. And that, of course, will be part of what we're going to talk about in this coming week. So I think just the leaving thing is that, we are still, even though we like to think of ourselves, particularly in Canada, as being not racist, I think we all acknowledge that there are so many ways that we are, and they're not always intentional. Some of them are very subtle, and that what we have to do as instructors is become aware, and that requires us to reflect on ourselves and our own behavior, And it's an ongoing process. We're not going to kind of get rid of it in a week, and awareness doesn't come with one insight. It's a kind of ongoing process. At least that's certainly been my experience of that. Um, and I think that, and we also have to remember that it's a different experience for those of us in the dominant groups or what have been historically dominant groups, and people who've had experiences in minority groups because they've had harder times and harder experiences, and it's um, and it's something that I don't think everybody immediately identifies with or sees the depth of the impact of. And which is why the creating safe space really takes some time and some trust, and that takes a lot of interaction. So, so I think that's all I wanted to say about those. I'll save that actually. Oh no, let's just cancel it. And just to go on to this coming week where we are, let's see. So, online community is going to be our next discussion area, and Alison and Andrew are going to take us through this week, and they've already set up a rather interesting set of activities for the week, which starts with this Venn diagram activity, and they've done a nice job of giving us some different ways to participate in processing the ideas we've been doing in the reading. So I look forward to seeing how we do for that. And we've got 3 very different ways of thinking about community, and each of them has, each of them addresses slightly different ways of thinking about community, and I think they all have value, but each one sort of gets us to think about different facets of what community entails and what its value for learning might be, and where it's problematic, and so forth. So I look forward to our discussion about that, and I look forward to talking to you more about that this week. And I will be back in Canada we're coming back Saturday, so I'll be there then. But I've fortunately got internet connections, so I'm pretty good this time, so that's working out well. Okay, nice to talk to you all, and I'll see you soon.